The stars around Kethrin Prime were burning. Thousands of ships filled the black sky, their weapons firing without pause. Explosions lit up the darkness like dying suns. And with each flash, another coalition vessel was destroyed. Admiral Zintora stood on the bridge of her command ship, watching the battle through the massive viewing screen. She was Aurelian, a species known for their 4 eyes and hard shell-like skin. Her people had lived in peace for over 10,000 years. They had never known war. None of the coalition species had known war until the Velthari came. The Velthari Dominion had appeared from the outer reaches of the galaxy 2 years ago. They were conquerors. They lived for battle and expansion. Their fleet was massive, their weapons were advanced, and their soldiers felt no mercy. In just 2 years, they had taken 17 star systems. Billions of lives had been lost or enslaved. Now they were here, at Kethrin Prime, the last stronghold of the Galactic Coalition. Zintora watched as another group of coalition ships exploded on the screen. Her fleet was outnumbered 3-1. The Velthari had brought 800 warships to this battle, each one larger and more powerful than anything the coalition possessed. "Admiral," her tactical officer said, his voice shaking, "we have lost 40% of our fleet. Shield generators on the outer defense stations are failing." Zintora closed 2 of her 4 eyes in pain. She had sent distress calls to every known civilization in the galaxy. She had begged for help, but most species were too far away, too weak, or too afraid to answer. "What about the reinforcements from the Toreth system?" she asked. "Destroyed in transit, Admiral." The Velthari intercepted them before they could reach us. The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew what this meant. There would be no help. There would be no rescue. Kethrin Prime would fall. And with it, the last hope of the free galaxy. Zintora turned to look at her crew. They were young, most of them. Scientists and explorers who had been forced to become soldiers. They had families on the planet below. Children. Loved ones. All of them would be dead or enslaved by morning. "Admiral," the communications officer suddenly said, "we are receiving a response to our distress call." Zintora turned sharply. "From whom?" "The humans, Admiral." "From the Sol system." For a moment, Zintora did not understand. The humans were a young species, barely 200 years into space travel. They had been discovered by coalition explorers a century ago, but they had declined to join the Alliance. They preferred to stay isolated in their small corner of the galaxy, exploring and studying the stars at their own pace. The coalition's intelligence reports on humanity were limited. They knew humans were curious and creative, but also strangely private. They had allowed no alien visitors to their home world. They had shared no technology. They kept to themselves, and most species had forgotten they existed. "What do they say?" Zintora asked. The communications officer looked at his screen. "They say they are sending help, Admiral." A tiny spark of hope flickered in Zintora's chest. "How many ships? How many ships? How many ships?" The officer paused. He read the message again, as if he had made a mistake. Then he looked up at the Admiral with confusion in his eyes. "1 ship, Admiral. They are sending 1 ship." The spark of hope died instantly. Zintora felt anger rise in her chest. 1 ship? Against 800 Velthari warships? Was this some kind of joke? Were the humans mocking the coalition's suffering? "1 ship," she repeated, her voice flat. "They send 1 ship to a battle that has already cost us 200 vessels. Perhaps they have nothing else to send," her first officer suggested. "They are a small species. Their fleet is probably limited to exploration craft." Zintora shook her head. "Then why bother sending anything at all? 1 ship will make no difference. It will be destroyed in seconds." On the viewing screen, another coalition cruiser exploded. The Velthari were pushing closer to the planet now. Their massive dreadnoughts moved through the debris like predators through water, crushing everything in their path. "How long until the human ship arrives?" Zintora asked. "Approximately 1 hour, Admiral. We may not last that long." She turned back to the screen and watched her fleet die. The coalition had been built on principles of peace and cooperation. 12 species had come together to explore the stars, share knowledge, and build a better future. They had never imagined that something like the Velthari could exist. They had never prepared for war, and now they were paying the price. Zintora wondered what the human ship would look like when it arrived. Probably a small exploration vessel, armed with basic weapons. The humans would see the scale of the battle and realize their mistake. They would either flee or be destroyed in moments. Either way, it did not matter. Catherine Prime would fall. The coalition would end. The Velthari would continue their conquest until the entire galaxy belonged to them. The supreme commander of the Velthari fleet, a massive warrior named Vethkar, sat on his throne aboard the flagship and watched the battle with satisfaction. Everything was going according to plan. The coalition was weak, just as he had predicted. Their ships were fragile. Their tactics were primitive. They did not understand the nature of war. Vethkar had been born for conquest. His entire species lived for the thrill of battle and the glory of victory. They had conquered dozens of civilizations before the coalition, and they would conquer dozens more after. Supreme Commander, one of his officers reported, "Our sensors have detected a new contact entering the system. Coalition reinforcements? Unknown, Commander. The ship's design does not match any known species. It appears to be human." Vethkar's eyes narrowed. He had heard of the humans, a small, isolated species from a distant star system. They were considered irrelevant by Velthari intelligence. Their technology was primitive. Their military was non-existent. "One ship," the officer added. "It is alone." Vethkar laughed. The sound echoed through his bridge like thunder. "One ship?" The humans had sent one ship against the Velthari Dominion? "How amusing," he said. "Perhaps they wish to surrender in person. Or perhaps they are simply fools." He leaned back in his throne and smiled. "Let them come. We will destroy them with the rest." Far away, at the edge of the system, a single dark shape dropped out of hyperspace. The USS Sentinel had arrived, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. Captain Daniel Vance stood at the center of the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back. Through the viewing screen, he could see the distant flashes of battle, explosions, energy weapons, ships dying. The coalition was losing badly. He had reviewed the intelligence reports during the journey. 800 Velthari warships, advanced plasma cannons, regenerative armor that could heal itself during combat. The Velthari were considered the most dangerous species in the known galaxy. They had never lost a war. Vance was not impressed. Around him, his crew worked in silence. They were professionals, trained for years for exactly this kind of situation. Lieutenant Kate Morrison sat at the weapons console, her fingers resting lightly on the controls. Commander Sam Liu monitored the navigation systems. Chief Engineer Tony Garcia watched the power readings from his station. There were only 42 people aboard the Sentinel. It was a small crew for a warship, but the Sentinel was not like other warships. It did not need hundreds of crew members to operate. Its systems were automated, precise, and deadly. "Distance to the battle zone?" Vance asked. "Approximately 15 minutes at current speed, Captain," Liu replied. Vance nodded slowly. 15 minutes. The coalition might lose another 50 ships in that time. But rushing in would be a mistake. He needed to arrive at the right position, at the right angle. "Maintain current speed," he ordered. "Lieutenant Morrison, begin charging the primary weapons array." "Already charging, Captain," Morrison replied. "We will be at full power in 10 minutes. Vance allowed himself a small smile. Morrison was good at her job. They all were. The Sentinel had been humanity's greatest secret for the past 50 years. On the surface, Earth appeared to be a peaceful world, focused on exploration and science. Humanity had declined to join the Galactic Coalition not because they were afraid, but because they did not want anyone to know what they had built. For centuries, humans had been killing each other. World wars, nuclear weapons, chemical attacks, biological warfare. Humanity had invented 1,000 ways to destroy itself, and they had come close to doing exactly that on several occasions. But then they had reached the stars. They had discovered that they were not alone in the universe, and they had made a decision: never again. If humanity was ever forced to fight again, they would not wage long, bloody wars. They would not allow generations to suffer in endless conflict. If they had to fight, they would end it instantly. One strike, complete victory, no mercy. The Sentinel was the result of that decision. It was not just a warship. It was a weapon of absolute destruction. Designed to win any battle in seconds, it carried technology that no other species in the galaxy had even imagined. Microsingularity warheads, graviton acceleration systems, quantum-locked targeting that could track every enemy ship simultaneously. Humanity hoped they would never have to use it. For 50 years, the Sentinel had sat in a hidden shipyard near Saturn, waiting. But when the distress call came from Kethren Prime, the decision was clear. Earth could not stand by while innocent worlds burned. "Captain," the communications officer said, "we are receiving a message from the Coalition flagship. They are asking about our combat capabilities." Vance thought for a moment. "Tell them we are here to help. Nothing more." "Yes, Captain." On the Coalition command ship, Admiral Zintora read the human response with frustration. They were here to help? One small ship was here to help against 800 Velthari warships? The humans were either insane or arrogant beyond belief. She studied the sensor data on the human vessel. It was small, barely a kilometer long. Its hull was dark and angular, covered in strange patterns that her sensors could not identify. The ship carried no visible weapons, no shield generators, no obvious systems of any kind. "What kind of ship is that?" she asked her tactical officer. "Unknown design, Admiral. We have no records of anything similar. The hull material is blocking our deep scans. We cannot determine what is inside." Zintora felt a growing sense of unease. Something was wrong. The humans had sent a single ship into the most dangerous battle in galactic history, and they did not seem concerned at all. Either they were fools, or they knew something that no one else did. On the Velthari flagship, Supreme Commander Vethkar was also studying the human ship. Unlike Zintora, he felt no unease, only amusement. "Look at it," he said to his officers. "So small, so fragile. The humans must be desperate to send such a weak vessel." "Should we intercept it, Supreme Commander?" one of his captains asked. Vethkar considered the question. The human ship was approaching slowly, making no attempt to hide or maneuver. It would reach the battle zone in a few minutes. "Send a squadron to destroy it," Vethkar ordered. 60 ships should be more than enough. I want the human vessel eliminated before it can even fire a shot. "Yes, Supreme Commander." 60 Velthari cruisers broke formation and began accelerating toward the Sentinel. Each cruiser was heavily armed with plasma cannons and torpedo launchers. Each one carried a crew of over 1,000 warriors. On the Sentinel, Lieutenant Morrison tracked the approaching ships. "Captain, 60 hostile vessels are moving to intercept us. They will be in weapons range in 4 minutes." Vance studied the tactical display. 60 ships. A reasonable response from the Velthari commander. He was testing the human vessel, trying to gauge its capabilities. He would learn soon enough. "All hands," Vance spoke into the ship-wide communication system. "This is the captain. We will be engaging hostile forces in approximately 4 minutes. I want everyone at their stations, ready for combat operations." He paused for a moment, then continued. "I know many of you hoped we would never have to use this ship for its true purpose. I hope the same thing. But the universe has given us no choice. There are innocent people on that planet below. And there are brave soldiers dying to protect them. We will not let their sacrifice be in vain." The crew listened in silence. They knew what was about to happen. They had trained for this moment their entire careers. "Today, we show the galaxy what humanity is capable of," Vance said quietly. "Today, we end this war." He turned to Morrison. "Lieutenant, are weapons fully charged?" "Yes, Captain. All systems are at 100%. Vance looked at the approaching Velthari ships. They had no idea what was coming. They thought they were attacking a weak, primitive species. They thought this would be easy. They were about to learn the truth. Lock targets, Vance ordered. All hostile vessels. Morrison's fingers moved across her console. Targeting solutions locked, Captain. All 800 enemy ships tagged and tracked. Vance took a deep breath. This was the moment. There was no going back. On my command, he said. Fire. The 60 Velthari cruisers approached the human ship with confidence. Their captains laughed among themselves on their private communication channels. This would be the easiest kill of the entire battle. One small vessel against 60 warships. The humans were either very brave or very stupid. On the lead cruiser, Captain Threnax ordered his weapons officers to prepare a full barrage. He wanted to destroy the human ship in one glorious volley. He wanted to show the Supreme Commander that he was worthy of honor and promotion. All weapons charged, his officer reported. Ready to fire on your command. Threnax smiled with satisfaction. The human ship was just sitting there, not moving, not maneuvering. Perhaps they had realized their mistake. Perhaps they were frozen with fear, understanding at last that they were about to die. Open fire, Threnax commanded. But before a single Velthari weapon could discharge, something happened. On the bridge of the USS Sentinel, Captain Daniel Vance spoke one word. Fire. Lieutenant Kate Morrison pressed a single button on her console. And the universe changed forever. The Sentinel's dark hull seemed to split apart. Thousands of small ports opened across its surface, revealing rows upon rows of launch tubes. In less than a heartbeat, the ship released its payload. Not missiles, not plasma bolts, not anything the galaxy had ever seen before. Micro-singularity warheads. Each one was the size of a small ball. Each one contained a collapsed black hole, stabilized by magnetic fields, and accelerated to nearly the speed of light through graviton rail systems. There were thousands of them, enough to target every Velthari ship in the system. Captain Threnax had exactly 1 second to see something on his sensors. A flash of movement. A cloud of tiny objects racing toward his fleet faster than anything he had ever witnessed. He opened his mouth to give an order, but the words never came. The first warhead struck his ship directly in the center. It punched through the shields as if they did not exist. It penetrated the hull without slowing down, and then, for a brief moment, it destabilized. The contained black hole expanded for just a fraction of a second. Not enough to become dangerous to nearby ships. Just enough to consume everything within 100 meters. Threnax's cruiser did not explode. It did not break apart. It simply vanished. One moment it was there. A massive warship filled with over 1,000 warriors. The next moment, there was only empty space and a faint trace of radiation. The other 59 cruisers followed in the same instant. Each one struck by its own warhead. Each one erased from existence before anyone aboard could even understand what was happening. The first wave was gone. 1 second after the Sentinel fired. 60 ships destroyed without a single survivor. On the Coalition command ship, Admiral Zintora stared at her tactical display in disbelief. The 60 red markers that represented the Velthari cruisers had simply disappeared. No debris, no escape pods, no distress signals. They were gone. What happened? She demanded. What did the human ship do? Her tactical officer shook his head, his hands trembling over his console. I do not know, Admiral. Our sensors recorded a massive energy discharge from the human vessel, followed by the complete destruction of all 60 ships. The entire event took less than 1 second. Zintora felt her blood run cold. Less than 1 second. 60 ships destroyed in less than 1 second. That was not possible. No weapon in the known galaxy could do that. But the Sentinel was not finished. On the Velthari flagship, Supreme Commander Vethkar received the report of his lost squadron with shock. 60 ships, gone in an instant? The human vessel must have caught them off guard somehow. A surprise attack, a hidden weapon. Send more ships, he ordered. 100 cruisers. Destroy that vessel immediately. Send more ships, you can follow that vessel. But before his order could be carried out, his tactical officer screamed, Supreme Commander, Multiple contacts incoming, thousands of them. Vethkar looked at his display and saw a cloud of small objects racing toward his fleet. They were moving at incredible speed, far faster than any missile or torpedo he had ever encountered. And there were so many of them. Thousands upon thousands. Each one targeted at a different ship. "Raise shields," Vethkar shouted. "All ships, evasive maneuvers." It was too late. The second volley of micro-singularity warheads struck the Velthari fleet like the fist of an angry god. Ships vanished by the dozens. Massive dreadnoughts that had taken years to build were erased in the blink of an eye. Cruisers, destroyers, carriers, support vessels. Nothing was spared. The Sentinel continued firing. A third volley. A fourth. Each warhead found its target with perfect accuracy. The quantum-locked targeting system tracked every enemy ship simultaneously, calculating trajectories and compensating for movement. There was no escape. There was no defense. Supreme Commander Vethkar watched in horror as his fleet was annihilated around him. Ships that had conquered 17 star systems were being destroyed like insects. His warriors, the finest soldiers in the Dominion, were dying without even a chance to fight back. "This is not possible," he whispered. "This cannot be happening." He turned to his communications officer. "Send a message to the human ship. Tell them we surrender. Tell them we will leave this system immediately." But the officer never had a chance to transmit the message. A warhead struck the flagship directly on the bridge. For one brief instant, Vethkar saw a point of absolute darkness appear in front of him, a hole in reality itself. And then he saw nothing at all. 13 seconds. That was how long it took. 13 seconds from the moment Captain Vance gave the order to fire until the last Velthari ship was destroyed. 800 warships, the most powerful fleet in the galaxy, erased from existence in less time than it took to draw a breath. The Sentinel hung motionless in space, its weapon ports slowly closing. Around it, there was only darkness and silence. The debris that would normally follow a battle did not exist. The ships had not been destroyed in any conventional sense. They had simply been consumed, folded into the brief micro-singularities, and compressed into nothing. On the bridge, Captain Vance stood in silence. His crew did not cheer. They did not celebrate. They simply sat at their stations, processing what they had just done. 800 ships, hundreds of thousands of lives, gone in 13 seconds. "All hostile contacts eliminated," Lieutenant Morrison reported, her voice barely above a whisper. "Weapons returning to standby mode." Vance nodded slowly. He felt no joy, no triumph, only a deep, heavy sadness. This was the weapon humanity had built. This was the cost of absolute victory. "Open a channel to the Coalition flagship," he ordered. "Tell them the battle is over." In the distance, Kethrin Prime continued to orbit its sun, unaware of how close it had come to destruction. The planet was safe now. The Coalition was saved. But nothing would ever be the same again. The galaxy had just learned what humanity was capable of, and they would never forget. Admiral Zintora could not move. She stood frozen on the bridge of her command ship, all four of her eyes fixed on the tactical display. Where 800 red markers had burned just moments ago, there was now only empty space. The Velthari fleet was gone. Completely, absolutely gone. Her crew was equally paralyzed. No one spoke, no one moved. The only sound on the bridge was the soft hum of the ship's systems and the distant rumble of damaged sections venting atmosphere. Zintora had been a military officer for over 200 years. She had seen battles before, though none as desperate as this one. She understood tactics. She understood weapons. She understood the fundamental principles of space combat. But she did not understand what had just happened. The Velthari were the most powerful military force in the known galaxy. Their fleet had never been defeated. Their ships were faster, stronger, and more advanced than anything the Coalition possessed. And yet, in 13 seconds, a single human vessel had destroyed all 800 of them. 13 seconds. The number echoed in Zintora's mind. It was impossible. It was insane. It was the kind of thing that happened in old legends and stories. Not in real life. Admiral, her communications officer finally said, breaking the silence. The human ship is hailing us. Zintora took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. On screen, the main viewing display flickered, and the image of a human appeared. He was male, middle-aged by human standards, with gray at the edges of his dark hair and tired lines around his eyes. He wore a simple uniform, dark blue with no decorations or medals. Behind him, Zintora could see other humans working quietly at their stations. Admiral Zintora, the human said. I am Captain Daniel Vance of the USS Sentinel. The Velthari fleet has been neutralized. Do you require medical or humanitarian assistance for your remaining vessels? His voice was calm, steady. There was no pride in his words, no celebration of victory. He spoke as if he had just completed an ordinary task. Not the most devastating military action in galactic history. Zintora found her voice. Captain, how? Vance did not answer immediately. He seemed to consider the question carefully, as if deciding how much to reveal. My species has a complicated history, Admiral, he finally said. We spent thousands of years learning how to hurt each other. We invented weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single blast. We created poisons that could kill millions. We designed machines of war so terrible that the mere threat of using them was enough to prevent wars. He paused, his eyes carrying the weight of that history. When we reached the stars and discovered that we were not alone, we made a decision. We would not repeat the mistakes of our past. We would not wage long, bloody wars that destroyed generations. If we ever had to fight again, we would end it instantly. One strike, complete victory. No prolonged suffering. Zintora stared at him. You built weapons to end wars before they begin. We built weapons so terrible that no one would ever want to face them, Vance confirmed. We hoped we would never have to use them. For 50 years, the Sentinel has been hidden in our home system, waiting, but when we received your distress call, we could not stand by and watch innocent people die. Zintora looked at the empty space where the Velthari fleet had been. 800 ships. You destroyed 800 ships in seconds. Yes. How many weapons like that do you have? Vance was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. Enough. A cold feeling spread through Zintora's body. Enough. The humans had built enough weapons to destroy any fleet in the galaxy. And no one had known. For decades, this species had been sitting quietly in their corner of the galaxy, appearing primitive and weak, while secretly possessing the power to annihilate civilizations. Why did you hide this? She asked. Why did you refuse to join the coalition? If we had known what you could do, the Velthari would never have attacked. Vance's expression became sad. That is exactly why we hid it, Admiral. The moment other species learned what we could do, they would fear us. They would hate us. They would either try to destroy us before we could become a threat, or they would demand that we fight their wars for them. He shook his head slowly. We did not want to be the galaxy's weapon. We did not want to be feared. We just wanted to explore the stars in peace, learning and growing like any young species. But when we saw what the Velthari were doing, when we saw innocent worlds burning, he stopped, his voice catching slightly. We could not ignore it. Some things are worth breaking our silence for. Zintora thought about his words. She understood, in a way. If the coalition had known about human capabilities, they would have demanded human protection. They would have become dependent on human power, and eventually, they would have resented and feared their protectors. What happens now? She asked. Vance straightened slightly. Now, we go home. The Sentinel is not a diplomatic vessel. Earth's government will send proper representatives to discuss the future. I am just a soldier who just saved our entire civilization, a soldier who just killed hundreds of thousands of beings in 13 seconds, Vance replied quietly. There is no glory in what I did today, Admiral. The Velthari were warriors. Many of them probably believed they were fighting for a noble cause. Now they are gone. And I am the one who ended them. Zintora studied the human captain's face. She saw no joy there. No pride. Only a deep, heavy sorrow. This was not a conqueror celebrating victory. This was a man carrying an enormous burden. Thank you, Captain, she said softly. Whatever your reasons, whatever the cost, you saved us. You saved Kethryn Prime and everyone on it. That matters. Vance nodded slowly. I hope so, Admiral. I truly hope so. The communication ended, and Zintora stood alone on her bridge. Around her, her surviving crew began the process of rescue and recovery. There were wounded to treat, damaged ships to repair, a planet to reassure, but Zintora could not stop thinking about the human ship, now turning away from the battle zone and heading back toward its distant home. She thought about the quiet captain with the tired eyes. She thought about the weapons that could erase entire fleets in seconds, and she thought about the future. The galaxy had changed today. The balance of power had shifted forever. Every species would soon learn what humans were capable of. Some would be grateful, others would be terrified. And everyone would want to know the same thing. What would humanity do next? Zintora had no answer. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The humans had been watching the galaxy in silence for decades. And they had chosen to remain hidden. But now that their secret was out, nothing would ever be the same again. The age of innocence was over. The age of humanity had begun. The news spread across the galaxy like fire. Within days, every species in every system had heard the story. The mighty Velthari Dominion, conquerors of 17 star systems, destroyers of countless civilizations, had been completely annihilated by a single human warship. 800 vessels gone in 13 seconds. At first, no one believed it. The story seemed too fantastic, too impossible to be true. But the evidence was undeniable. The Coalition released sensor recordings showing the moment the Sentinel fired its weapons. Scientists studied the radiation signatures left behind where the Velthari ships had been. Military analysts examined the footage again and again, trying to understand what they were seeing. The conclusion was always the same. The humans had weapons beyond anything the galaxy had ever imagined, and they had been hiding them for decades. Fear spread quickly. Species that had barely heard of humanity now saw them as the greatest threat in existence. If the humans could destroy 800 ships so easily, what could they do to planets? To entire star systems? Some leaders called for immediate action against Earth, demanding that humanity be destroyed before they could become the new conquerors of the galaxy. But others counseled patience. The humans had not attacked anyone. They had not demanded tribute or territory. They had come to Kethryn Prime to help, to save innocent lives. Perhaps they were not the monsters that frightened minds imagined them to be. 3 months after the battle, the reformed Galactic Coalition held its first assembly since the war. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the Great Hall on Kethryn Prime, filling the massive chamber with a rainbow of different forms and faces. And standing at the central podium was a single human woman. Ambassador Megan Drake was small by human standards, with graying hair and kind eyes. She wore simple clothing. Nothing fancy or intimidating. She looked more like someone's grandmother than the representative of the most dangerous military power in the galaxy. But every being in the room watched her with intense attention, some with hope, some with fear, all with the understanding that her words would shape the future of galactic civilization. Megan Drake looked around the assembly and smiled gently. "Thank you for allowing me to speak today," she began, her voice soft but clear. "I know many of you are frightened. I know many of you have questions. I will try to answer them as honestly as I can." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Humanity did not ask for the power we possess. We developed it out of necessity, born from centuries of war with ourselves. We learned, through terrible experience, that the only way to end violence is to make the cost of violence unthinkable. So we built weapons that no one could survive, hoping that their mere existence would prevent us from ever using them. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of various representatives. When we discovered that we were not alone in the universe, we faced a choice. We could reveal our power and become the galaxy's policeman, enforcing our will on others. Or we could remain hidden, allowing other species to develop and grow on their own terms. We chose the second path. We wanted to be neighbors, not rulers. A Torith representative raised a tentacle. But you have revealed yourselves now. What changed? Megan Drake's expression grew serious. The Velthari changed things. We watched them conquer system after system. We saw the suffering they caused, and we realized that remaining silent was itself a choice to allow evil to spread while we did nothing. She shook her head slowly. We could not live with that, so we sent the Sentinel, not to conquer, not to intimidate, just to stop the killing. Another representative spoke up. And now? Will you demand payment for your help? Will you expect us to serve you? No. Megan Drake's voice was firm. We seek nothing from you. No tribute. No territory. No power. We ask only to live in peace, and we extend that same wish to everyone else. She paused, then added more quietly. But we will not tolerate what the Velthari did. We will not stand by while innocent worlds burn. If another power rises and chooses the path of conquest and cruelty, we will respond. A heavy silence fell over the assembly. Everyone understood what she was saying. Humanity would not rule the galaxy, but they would protect it. One of the Rillian representatives spoke. And if someone challenges you, if they believe they can defeat your ships, Megan Drake smiled again. But this time there was something in her eyes that made every being in the room feel cold. Then we will send another ship. The assembly continued for several more hours, but the message had been delivered. Humanity was not interested in conquest. They were not looking for power or glory. They simply wanted peace. But if anyone threatened that peace, if anyone tried to become the next Velthari, they would face the same fate. It was not a threat. It was a promise. 6 months after the assembly, Captain Daniel Vance retired from military service. He had been offered promotions, medals, and positions of power, but he had refused them all. He wanted nothing more to do with war. He moved to a small house in the mountains of Montana, far from cities and crowds. He spent his days fishing in the local streams and watching the sun set behind the peaks. Sometimes he would sit on his porch at night, looking up at the stars and thinking about the ships he had destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of lives ended in 13 seconds. Warriors, engineers, officers, and crew. Each one had been a thinking being, with hopes and fears, families and dreams, and he had erased them all without hesitation. It had been necessary. He knew that. The Velthari would have conquered the galaxy and enslaved billions. The Sentinel had saved countless innocent lives, but that knowledge did not make the burden any lighter. His first officer, Commander Sam Liu, visited him once. They sat on the porch together, drinking coffee and watching the clouds drift over the mountains. The galaxy is calling you a hero, Liu said. They want to build monuments in your honor. Vance shook his head. I am not a hero. I am just a man who pushed a button. You saved billions of lives. I ended hundreds of thousands more. Liu was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, What you did was right, Daniel. The Velthari would have destroyed everything. Vance looked at his old friend. I know it was right. That does not mean it was easy. That does not mean I can forget. They sat together until the sun went down, 2 soldiers carrying the weight of an impossible victory. In the galactic records, humanity was reclassified. No longer were they listed as a developing species with limited capabilities. Now they carried a new designation, one that had never been used before. Apex Predator, Dormant. It was a warning and a promise combined. Humanity was the most dangerous species in the galaxy. They had weapons that could destroy any fleet, any world, any civilization. But they chose not to use that power. They slept, watching the stars, waiting to see if they would be needed again. And in the centuries that followed, no one ever tested that classification. The galaxy had learned its lesson at Catherine Prime. Some creatures were too dangerous to provoke. The age of conquest was over. The age of peace had begun. And somewhere in the mountains of Earth, an old soldier watched the sunset and hoped that his sacrifice had been worth it. The galaxy would never forget what humanity had done. They would never forget the ship that entered the battle alone and ended it in 13 seconds. And they would always remember the simple truth that the human ambassador had spoken. If anyone chose the path of violence, if anyone tried to become the next Velthari, there would be consequences. Earth would send another ship, and that would be enough.